La 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 la.
Inner Wealth Podcast.
La 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 la.
Inner Wealth Podcast.
La 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 la.
Inner Wealth Podcast.
Get out the matrix and live.
You know what day it is? Inner Wealth Podcast. Meditate and give. So manifest the greater this. And things all good cause I say it is. Invest in your inner wealth. Real generational wealth is mental health. It's an inside game, no toxicity. Let's talk and more listening. Ladies and gentlemen, and now introducing David McCullar, founder of Inception, the first mental health gym.
La 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 la.
Inner Wealth Podcast.
La 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 la.
Inner Wealth Podcast.
La 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 la.
Inner Wealth Podcast.
Get out the matrix and live.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Inner Wealth Podcast. Got a very special guest here with me today. Somebody who's really been around the industry, the wellness industry, as long as I've known him. He's been around the wellness industry. My guy Cawthon. What up, though, man?
Hey, same old, living life to the best I can at least.
So you've been in the wellness industry for what, 8 years?
Yeah, coming up on 8 years now and staying rocking and rolling. Staying busy.
How'd you end up getting into the wellness industry?
Great question. I would say as far as me getting into the wellness industry, it kind of dates back to um, really the self-help, kind of taking that journey and ultimately, doing some kind of doing some research on podcasts and alternative health and that kind of stuff, and found something which is called floating, of course. Started that journey back in 2013. My buddy kind of introduced me to floating and tried it a few times, and that's kind of how I started up with the health and wellness venture, if you will.
It seems like most of us kind of venture into the wellness world by self-help first. So who was some of the people you were listening to at that time?
I mean, a lot of my when it comes to listening to, a lot of my inspirations: Steve Jobs,
Mm.
Kanye West. I know it's a wide range of personality there, but
Right.
yeah, I mean, really just a wide range of people, and then obviously the influence of my friends and stuff, kind of introducing me to new ways of health and wellness,
hmm
giving me kind of a portal or a gateway to take this jump to floating.
Yeah, I remember though when I first met you, you saw my company at that time and you were like, "Hey man, I had an idea. I was doing something. You were doing something around brain training or something like that, right?
Yes,
What
sir.
were you doing?"
Yeah, so it was trying to get people into float centers as in like an affiliate type of setup. So when you and I
Mhm.
engaged, it was along the lines of more along the lines of trying to work together to get people in the door for floating for you.
Mhm.
Um, so I wouldn't say, I mean, really, when it comes to how I engage with you is really because you helped me being one of the first clients of our Floatpod
Mm.
product, and kind of helping me get into the tech stuff, and kind of guiding me through learning the ins and outs of how to troubleshoot with you,
Yeah.
how to engage in that kind of stuff. So really, we kind of ventured off from that, helping kind of working together on how to fix your tanks and that to um, to then talking about how we can work together as an affiliate, work together as trying to get people to your location. Because
Mhm.
I'm based out of Northwest Ohio originally, and so I know a ton of people in the Northwest Ohio area, and knowing a bunch of people, it was one of those things I wanted to try to facilitate a way to get people up to Michigan to float as much as I
Which
could.
which is um pretty weird for people in the Midwest for floating. I mean, it wasn't a lot of places that had floating.
Right.
Like at that point in time when I first did flotation therapy, and that's what we're talking about, flotation therapy, and we'll dive deeper into what that is.
For sure.
If you listen to the podcast, you hear me talk about it a lot. But um like it was like two or three places in Michigan at that time. And it was one up in Swartz Creek, which is like 40 minutes from here.
Okay.
Closer to Flint, in the middle of like nowhere. Like like why is this place? It's like literally cornfields
Ah,
outside. Like
gotcha.
why is this place that has floating here? And when I remember when I floated the first time, I didn't have the best experience.
Is that where you floated up there, up north of Michigan?
Yep.
Okay.
I didn't have the best experience, not because it was anything wrong with the facility or anything like that. It was that, man, when I got in there for the first time and you just go from, all this stimulus to you get into a tank and there's nothing, that
Hmm.
was super jarring for me.
For sure.
And I remember having like a mini panic attack, like, oh man, I got to get out of this thing.
Hmm.
Um, but it was my second time floating that I came back home and I was like, I just walked around outside for like an hour. And I just remember everything just looked super crisp.
Mm.
Like everything had went from 1080 to 4K.
Truth.
Literally I can see the condensation like wow, is that condensation? Like would I see that before? I
Hmm.
noticed when somebody called me, I immediately took the phone away from my head because I felt like if the volume was up so loud, but my volume had always been what it was set at.
Hmm.
But I was just super sensitive at to that point after floating, for that second time. And that's when I decided I was gonna get a $20,000 float pod.
Hmm.
And that was the first thing I saw too, because the tanks that I saw at that time, I floated in a Oasis tank, the first one.
Okay, more of a traditional style.
Traditional style,
Mm.
no light, no sound, like humidity issue.
We learned some things along the way, huh?
Yeah, humidity issue. And the second tank I floated in was a float away tank.
Okay.
And that's the one but
I
that
apologize.
was the one that has the thing that closes down over your head. You hit the button and it's like a garage door almost coming down on top of you.
Hmm.
That one was better.
Yeah,
But I remember seeing the float pod technologies, and I was like, oh man, I gotta get me one of those tanks.
for sure. And we just launched, I think, right when you so you we were your first ever float tank in your facility, right?
Yeah.
Your first facility. Okay, so I didn't know that.
I
I
had the
guess
prototype.
you had
I had your prototype.
you were our first one of our first ever customers, and kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier. Um, that's something I can say when it comes to you getting into the float business. I was getting into the float business from the technical side of it, getting into the
Mhm.
manufacturing side of it, and you just getting into starting up offering that service because you've already been in the health and wellness industry for how long
Mhm.
at that point, and that's where you wanting to introduce Float Pod as a service to your customers. Me being on the technical side of it, wanting to help you kind of keep your tank afloat, no pun intended. That was something I kind of learned from you along
Mhm.
the way, and that's one thing I wanted to also point out to you. I didn't even have a chance to do this. I wanted to say, congratulations to you on everything you've done with your brand as Inception, starting where you started at, and kind of going from that all the way up to where you're at now, where you have an identified brand, you're working with all sorts of folks, and um, really changing the game. Taking a single float pod, and now you have a facility that has You have 4 float rooms in your place now.
Well, we got 3 tanks.
Okay.
We had 4.
Okay.
We ended up getting rid of the pod, unfortunately. That was the prototype.
It was a prototype.
I
Hey,
had but the prototype, man, that and first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. You've been, instrumental on my journey and just, starting off with that tank. I mean, because it wasn't easy, like getting a 1,000-pound tank into the facility I had.
hmm
And, you're getting in the water business. People don't understand that. You're really in the water business.
hmm
I went from, just using brain training technology, neurofeedback, and a couple other technologies. Now I'm dealing with water. Water. I'm dealing with sanitation, and that's another
hmm
thing we can talk about because people always freak out about sanitation. But
Right.
getting into all those things, so you were very instrumental. I mean, I've had times where I'm like calling you, "Hey, dude, something's going on with my tank," like and you were learning at the same time. We both were behind that thing together on the phone, like
Going
looking
through
at
it.
the guts of the float tank. And but now, fast forward and you like, you the guru of the float tanks.
That's
Like
right.
I don't think it doesn't matter what float tank is gonna be. A float tank is a float tank. You can figure out, what's going on with a tank, you
Exactly
know.
right.
So yeah, that was very you being a part of our journey in that beginning was very helpful. So again, appreciate that. So how did you when you first started getting into floating, like you said a buddy of yours
Showed me
told you
a
about it?
Joe Rogan podcast, like any other
Mm,
person that gets into this industry. Showed me a Joe Rogan podcast, and I was really inspired by that. I was like, man, I got to try this out. So I traveled up to Michigan. They had a Samadhi float tank. I can't remember exactly
Was
what
that in
town.
Rockford?
It was in Rockford, yeah,
Yeah,
Rockford, Michigan.
it was
Yeah,
another place.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So they had a Samadhi old school float tank. I went up there twice, and the first time I went up there, I tried the experience, really just let myself go, and then the second time, I really had a um, more or less an experience that changed my what I really wanted to do in the industry. At first, I thought I wanted to get into the spa, offering the service to people,
Mm-hmm.
common folk, and the second time I went and tried it. I just really wanted to get into the manufacturing, the distribution side of it. And
Mm.
so I wanted to learn the technology, how we take something that's used for sensory deprivation and try to actually give someone more of a uh, sensory acceleration, more or less.
Mm.
Offering different types of things like music, lights, VR, whatever you want to try to add. Um, and so I after that float, I got out about 45 minutes into my float, climbed behind the tank, started looking at all the different stuffs, and I started finding out, these things are just pumps. There's
Right.
there's a there's a UV system, an ozone system in the back end of it, and when you look at the sanitation elements of it, it's basic spa equipment. And
Mm.
I eventually end up finding out that a gentleman out in Arizona was going to be launching his own company at the time,
Mm.
which was Floatpod Therapies, and his name's Nick Janicki, and he was going to launch his own company, and I found out he's manufacturing out of Indianapolis, Indiana, which is where we're based out of now, and yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but yeah, long story short, there on that is that I ended up getting more into the technical stuff, more of
Mm.
the manufacturing stuff. I was really inspired by the technology. So yeah, taking that and getting more into the manufacturing and distribution stuff kind of changed my outlook on health and wellness and how to really offer this to people. So really working with you in the beginning
Mm.
kind of helped me understand the spa owner's perspective,
Yeah.
operating these things, running these things, keeping these things running as your business is running, and that's our goal at Flowpod is to try to you know keep engaged with our clients as opposed to working with them as customers. So
Mm.
that's one of the things.
How did the experience though help you in terms of just your overall uh mental health and wellness?
As when you, I guess, experience um, working with you, you mean, or getting
No,
stuff
just in general. You floated before, like how was it for you
for
personally?
for me personally, I can say getting an outcome from it. I wouldn't say I got anything but the focus end of it. I when it comes to me, I'm ADD. I jump from subject to subject. As you saw there earlier, I lose my train of thought here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and floating kind of helps me keep myself on track, allows me to keep myself focused for. So after I started floating really regularly, I was able to get rid of my ADD medicine
Mm.
and kind of wean myself off of that. It's kind of helped. It's more or less helped me streamline my focus on how I work. Really, that was the main thing that I noticed from the
Mm.
benefits of floating.
Well, let's break that down too. You're on ADHD medication, you said. What type of medication?
Adderall.
You're on Adderall. From being in the wellness industry for so long, what I've found with people, and we saw this early on before I even got into floating, is that most people who were diagnosed with ADD or ADHD were really misdiagnosed. Really, what they had was anxiety.
Mm,
And so what happens is when you're stressed or you have anxiousness, within your body, your cognitive abilities are going to decline. So you're not going to be able to focus and concentrate. So it's not that you just merely don't have the ability to focus and concentrate. Maybe it's um the anxiety and the nervous system is using its resources for things other than focusing and concentrating. So in talking about it in that regard, can you feel any reduction in anxiety from doing floating?
I do, yeah, most definitely, and personally that was the ADD part of it was personally for me, but overall, when it comes to helping with anxiety and stress,
Mhm.
well, yeah, most definitely it helps with that.
How about your family? Did you get any in your family into floating?
I did. My uncle John floats. He's actually, I think he has a float still banked at your place there at
Yeah, I met
Inception.
him some years ago.
Yeah, yeah. So my uncle John, he floats and he really enjoys it. He's actually a member down at True Rest down in Toledo.
Mhm.
Um, and he floats regularly, and he gets relief out of it. It's more or less the sleep end of it. He really benefits from the sleep. There's tons of research on how beneficial floating can be for the sleep as well.
Did you ever get with Feinstein?
I didn't, but I am working with one of his previous assistants for the research. Kaylee Elliott, she's on our team.
Hmm.
She's the director of research for us, kind of assisting with providing information on research and floating. And so, working with her and obviously working directly with Dr. Feinstein
Yeah.
is a good resource. So
Do you know any of the research that's coming out now recently?
recently, not as of probably the last 6 months, I can
Hmm.
say, but in the last few years, there's definitely a lot more research that's come out about how the benefits are on brain waves, sleep,
Mm-hmm.
really the PTSD end of it. It showed great research on that. They've done a lot of tests, infield tests. I don't know about trials fully, but
Mm-hmm.
as far as tests goes, they definitely done infield tests.
One thing that Joe Rogan talked about, on his podcast, he was saying how if people really understood the benefits of like floating, there would be like a line wrapped around the door, outside,
True.
And that statement, he made that statement probably shoot almost 10 years ago. And today, I think that um the things that we do, like the floating and the other tools that we use too, is very important because the stimulus that we receive now versus even 10 years ago when I met you is like drastically increased. Like you can get on any social media and your whole brain is just overwhelmed with just stimulus. Just the
Hmm.
moment that you wake up and you open your phone, like growing up, when did you ever have that amount of stimulus? Think about it when you grew up, you immediately ate candy soon as you opened your eyes. That's kind of like what we do. We're very overstimulated. So when Michael Hutchinson made that book, the book of was it the book of floating?
The book flowing, yep.
That was in the 80s.
Hmm.
I was born in 1980. I think that book came out like 88 or something like that.
It sounds about right,
So I
yeah.
was about 8 years old, and in that book, and talking about that, I stuck with floating because I read that book first.
Mm.
And if I think that if people are going to float, they need to read the book of floating.
I'm gonna be honest. I haven't read that book.
You know, read that book?
I have not read
Wow,
that book, so I
man.
need to get on it.
Yeah. So,
I've been so busy.
but that book, he's in the 80s talking about stimulation, talking about anxiety and stress
It
in the
that in those
80s.
times,
Yes.
right?
Like, dude, in the 80s, we had hard drives. We had floppy disk that
Hmm.
had like what 312 bytes of data.
Right.
Like 312 bytes, man, your phone like uses that when you just probably turn Wi-Fi on.
When you flip the switch, yeah,
Right. You know what I'm
on the
saying?
back.
So when he's talking about it at that time, um, like he had no idea where we were going to be today in amount of stimulation. So it seems like I believe that what we're doing is very needed to just be able to cope with just the day-to-day stressors, day-to-day life. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's where earlier when I mentioned about sensory acceleration as
Mhm.
opposed to sensory deprivation, I kind of contradict myself with this because I think we are overwhelmed by stimuli. I think we constantly, go through being bombarded. Our senses are constantly being bombarded, and it's a matter of us trying to control that and kind of set things aside to to keep ourselves from being bombarded by it. But at the same time, we are going through a technological age to where we have to kind of coincide with technology. It's not a matter
Mhm.
of and this may be a difference of opinion. You could tell me. It's when it comes to sensory acceleration and offering different things like VR and offering different things. Those things are also stressors in ways,
Yeah.
right? And having training tools like you are offering at your facility as a mental health gym is one of those things that those things counterbalance the effects of these technologies because I don't think there's ever a point because when you point out the floppy disk as an example
Mhm.
and using that as a way of looking how far technologies come, we have to I feel at least we have to grow with technology and find tools like Inception that counterbalance that in
Mm-hmm.
society.
Yeah.
Because if it was one of those things that technology wasn't harming us, we wouldn't need to have, facilities like, Inception.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and they're starting to have wellness retreats where people go and they just do silent meditations for like 7 days straight, like no talking, and you eat like vegetarian, no talking, you meditate all day.
hmm,
Like these types of retreats are becoming popular because of, again, I think that we feel sick. A lot of us don't know that we're sick. From I mean, again, if you sit and you just gorge yourself with food,
mhm.
something's not right. But at what point do we get to the place where we realize that we're gorging ourselves with information or with stimulus? I mean, how many shows can you watch?
Mhm.
I mean, look at how many apps you got.
Well, isn't that considered information overload?
Yeah.
You
So
know,
the brain will still look at it as a threat,
mhm.
you know?
Which at a certain point though is again, that's what's so I guess it's more or less it's one of those things that inspires me to keep trying to open up facilities
Mm,
and motivate folks to work with Inception and facilities like that offer these types of things because we are going to go through a period in time to where I mean just right now if you look at the last couple years people are so insensitive to death
yeah.
and I have a grandmother in the hospital and I have a friend's mother that's in the hospital right now going through this whole COVID thing and just finding out information it's one of those things because we're so bombarded with technology in some ways we become desensitized to trauma as well
Yeah.
I'm kind of branching off into a different you see how my brain works
But
sometimes.
I think that's very important that you're saying that because I feel that too. I was just online today and I was scrolling and I saw a friend's mother and I think she passed away and I just scrolled through it, you know?
Hmm.
And I want to say something, but I'm like, what
What
do
do you
I
say?
what do I say?
I'm gonna keep scrolling
Right.
because and that's where when we find out, and you go back to the 1980s, right? If you go back to the 1980s and someone tells you their mother passed away, you're trying to find out any way, shape, or form, whether you go buy flowers, whether you go pick up a
Right.
card for them, whatever, to try to comfort them. We're
Mhm.
we're now at a point now where we have ease of access to things, to where we're bypassing the things that are most
So it
important.
goes like, so we think about porn and how, if you look at it, so much porn as a man, you're
Hmm.
not gonna be able to get your dick up, man. Like, like that's just what it is because
True.
your brain is burning through, those receptor sites.
Hmm.
But think about it in terms of, yeah, if you keep seeing death and it just becomes normal, you know,
Hmm.
you're gonna have to see something more drastically uh traumatizing to get a rise out of you.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
that's what happens in porn. They got so many different genres of it. What is that about?
Hmm.
Well, if you start with one place, you may end up in the sickest realms of it because of the brain adapting. I mean,
Is
our
that
brains
is
is
that
not.
is that curiosity? What
I
is
don't
that?
think that's curiosity. I think that's adaptive nature. I think that's just the brain adapting. Like, like it's the same way if you smoke weed. Like, if you smoke weed every day, you can't smoke the same strain. You're gonna need something different,
Right.
right? So I
Mhm.
think it becomes kind of similar to that too. And I did a whole episode, and maybe this episode will be titled "Stimulus Porn Part 2" because that's really what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the amount of stimulation, and so like I don't like to call it floating or flotation therapy. It's really stimulus reduction. That's really what we need. It's not about the floating. It's
Mhm.
about the benefits of what that does for us. The lack of gravity and not having to process. I think in the book of floating, he talked about, and I don't know how scientific this is. I have to go back and look, but he said the brain is responsible for 80% of the brain's processing is just gravity alone.
Huh. I've never n
He said that in the book of floating. Don't quote me on that.
You know how the community
But
gets.
but yeah, I mean, I think that's where that 1 hour in the float tank equals 4 hours of deep rest. But we've learned that if 1 hour in the float tank equals 4 hours of Cortisol reduction.
It's cortisol reduction. It's not sleep, deep rest. It's not true
But
rest. No pun intended.
but in cortisol reduction, that happens when you get into sleep cycles.
Correct.
So that's
It,
that's where I can see that correlation comes from. Um, but yeah, man.
but
Like
wouldn't that be again kind of what your whole thing is, which is outcome based,
yeah,
having an outcome from it, as opposed to just
this novelty thing that I just want to float on water. And
mm,
that's why I said I read the book in the beginning, and it blew me away because I had already been doing neurofeedback. And so I knew about the brain. I knew about the brain wave. So when people talk about theta wave, I was like, yeah, I done looked at every frequency at this point, and I'm looking at it on 8 different sites across your scalp and measuring those frequencies in each group from delta all the way up to gamma. And I know what they're responsible for. And I know what they look like with your eyes open versus your eyes partially open versus your eyes closed, you know?
mm,
So when I'm looking at that and I get into floating, I'm looking at it in a much different way than the typical person getting into floating.
it's not as yours is more detail oriented. Yours is more um, getting into the weeds as opposed to just laying on the surface.
Yeah.
And kind of that's where working with you on your whole concept, regardless if you go with a flow pod or you
Mhm.
go with any different types of tanks, it's one of those things that um, you know when I work with you on have just generally having conversations using your mentorship that you give me and stuff, it's one of those things that um, I I take from a lot of what you're saying, and I see what you're trying to do with it with Inception. And
Mhm.
I look back 5 years ago and having conversations with you, and it's kind of crazy to think that the people that did get into this industry, that broke into this industry as just common folk business people that wanted to start up a business in floating, those people aren't around anymore.
Mhm.
They kind of fizzled away, and it's because they never tried to focus on the outcome of the customer or the client. You want to
Mhm.
build that's the difference between a customer and a client. I always like to point that out to people. A customer is a one-off. A client is someone you want to build a relationship with, and
Mhm.
you want them to be successful.
Yeah.
And so you kind of in some ways taught me the difference between a customer and a client in that way. And some of these facilities that have opened up a float spa don't care about the true outcome. They want to offer the service, but the outcome of the client is not really in scope.
And so we can talk about that for a second too in the wellness industry, because in the wellness industry is this, I was very naive, and I think you probably were too.
I still am in some ways.
And then what I mean by that is, man, when you have an idea or the feeling that you want to help people and you meet people who want to help people, you think everybody got good intentions. And you find out real fast
Well said.
that no matter how well your intentions are, and no matter if it's the wellness industry, there's some very corrupt individuals in the wellness world too.
Truth.
That's and I've seen that when I was in the church, very corrupt individuals in that. You can go to politics, very corrupt individuals in that. And
Business.
in business. And it's just there. It's always going to be there. And whatever industry you get in, there's going to be people there. I mean,
Mhm.
we've talked about some horror stories, people peeing in people's float tanks and stuff like that. Um, from whatever business issues that people got going on. But yeah, man, that exists in that world, and you would think that I would always want to be a proponent of using the tools first. Like I'm gonna always be my client. I'm gonna be my client.
Mhm.
So if I'm gonna be my best client, then how do you think I'm gonna treat you?
You gonna treat me well. You
I'm
treating yourself well. You gonna
I'm
treat me well.
I'm tell you, Cawthon, the best ways to use this thing is this. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it to you. I'm not gonna bullshit you about how long this gonna take. Like, how many times have you been floating over the years?
I'd say we'll just say 1,500 floats.
1,500. Well, I'm probably in there too.
You Yeah.
And people come to our type facilities and they do one or two or three and they think they've done something.
Mhm.
It's like you ain't even scratched the surface.
Haven't even peeled that onion peel back, and I think that's where this industry is kind of changing. You kind of coined the whole mental health gym, and that's where capturing what you're trying to sell to people is something that floating's been kind of in this period since John C. Lilly. It's always been in this period to where we're selling something that we can't identify, which I don't know if you want to call that a placebo, but
Mm,
people were offering a service that, as you were saying there, you are going to be your best client because you're using the tools. I don't believe that the people that were in the floating industry, I believe they floated, but as far as relaying the message to people and actually allowing people to receive it,
mm,
Inception, True Rest, there's other brands out there that have done a good job of getting people in the door and offering a service to people. But when it comes to outcome based compared to just getting people in the door, that's where the people that you see around are the people that were always cared about the outcome as opposed to just the one off, the customer versus
hmm
client again. Um, but yeah, the what were we talking about before that?
And
Apologies.
I was nervous about that too because when we first got into this industry, when I first got into it, I started seeing a lot of ideas and concepts like, oh, we're gonna put these in Planet Fitness. And I'm like,
Which we did. We got a couple of LA Fitnesses that have put them in. Planet Fitnesses we never broke into, but Planet Fitness we sold a tank to the founder of Planet Fitness, and they're still thinking about putting them into Planet Fitnesses. But that's a what were you gonna say there? Sorry, I kind
well,
of
I was just saying I just didn't think that was I think it loses its value because you have a $10 a month gym membership
hmm
and it becomes like just a little novelty thing at that point. You know what I'm saying?
right.
It's not valued. You're devaluing the service, and then too, where do you put it at in the facility? Like they're selling candy in Peace Zone. I mean, they're giving, you know what I'm
No,
saying?
no,
Like
they're definitely
it's
lowering
just
the value of the overall service if you were to add one into a Planet Fitness, because when you go to a place like Inception, you're getting a high quality value service. You're not dealing with a reception at the front desk, a receptionist at the front desk that's, checking you in with a quick scanner and telling you to
right.
go ahead and do whatever you want. You're dealing with, high quality services, and that's something that we're definitely not going to turn a client away if they
hmm
come to us and want to purchase from us. But at the same time, we want the best thing for the client. We don't want to sell someone that's going to put this thing into a basement that's in a closet.
Yeah.
We want to set them up for success, and that's where Planet Fitness, as you said there, may not be, just from a service standpoint, may not be the best, but as well when you think about the weights dropping, the vibrations, the different things,
hmm
someone may have maybe turned off by floating, by hearing that vibration, by a weight dropping and hitting the floor.
Right.
So mixing a gym and a float tank facility may
So
not be the
talk
best.
about it too in terms of I want to get your thoughts on this because I had Arnie Kander come to Inception at one point. He's one of the Pistons old time trainers, man. Arnie has been around for a long time. I mean, talking about back to the bad boy days. And he came into Inception and he just was congratulating me and saying, man, everything you got in here, you're doing it right. And so I said, what do you think about, I see they're putting float tanks in like training facilities, like the Lions have float tanks. They have James Ramsey's tanks.
Mm.
We lose every week, so we can't be using them. First of
Well,
all,
I tell you, there's been some championship programs that have put them in their facilities.
well, whatever. See that here goes the thing. The tool don't matter.
hmm
Who programs the tool
Is what matters.
is what matters.
Yes, sir.
Because you can put a baby grand piano in your house. That don't mean you know how to play the thing. That don't mean you know how to teach people how to play the thing. So, um, I was going down that road because Arnie was saying that he found out the players didn't want to be at the training facilities. They wanted to leave. So he said putting them in a training facility was counterproductive. He said it's
Mm.
better for them to go somewhere else
Get out.
and get out from the facility.
Mm.
And that's because I was like, oh, I never thought about it like that. And that made me think about, the Lions who have them. I mean, again, I don't know how much they really use it or don't use it, but I used to have Lions players come in. I had Jamal Agnew come in. He floated. He floated one day. The next day on Monday Night Football, Jamal ran back, punt return, kick return.
For a touchdown?
Yeah,
Look at him out
yeah.
here.
Yeah.
No, no,
I know they may say, "Well, that wasn't from floating." That's from floating, far as I'm concerned. That's what
give
my
him credit for
story.
the floating, yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I think having these things in athletic facilities, like we just did an install for the University of Texas.
Mm,
Um, Going down and putting them in those types of facilities, I think it's something to add value to their overall facility. I mean, these places that I've been to, like the Cubs,
mhm,
University of Texas, the Diamond, there's a number of different programs that we've worked with that have these things there, and they're state of the art. I mean, these players, the players that I've seen interact at these places are loving being there. They've kind of made it
mhm,
more of like a large scale mansion that has
mm,
everything, every tool and trick you can have there, and they have everything from full scale salt baths
mm.
to ice baths to all sorts of stuff. And I think having these types of pods and tanks in these facilities is going to be something that's beneficial. I do think though having a high quality service facility like Inception that actually offers the service gives you an outcome as opposed to looking at the University of Texas. Theirs is literally sitting right next to their team hot tub.
Yes. Yeah,
So
you're not
so
gonna get the same experience out
right,
of
you're
that.
not going to get sensory deprivation out of that. And
Mhm.
and I think when you start getting into the research, like with Dr. Feinstein, you start going to the cortisol levels and all those type. They're not getting the true benefits
Well, let
of.
me ask you, why aren't they coming to you? Because you have that expertise and that knowledge to know like this, and I'm sure you probably tell them. So why do they push back and do something goofy like that?
Well, yeah, I think it has to do with I think it has to do with what they've seen and what other team, because a lot of these trainers and stuff and a lot of the staff members and stuff, they do jump from team to team, and they work with
Mm,
the circles themselves are pretty small, and so when they all work together they've seen what they know what they know, and they worked with that type of setup before. So the University of Texas, as an example, those guys did similar things what the Indianapolis Colts did, because the trainers and stuff knew each other, and so they
mm,
kind of did an open concept to where
mm,
people can just come and go as they please, use the tanks, and they're still on a filtration time cycle. But like, let's say a player wants to get in for 15 minutes in that kind of facility, they can. They
mm,
wouldn't be able to do that. And I mean, they could go and hop in, a float tank and Inception for 15 minutes, but they're wasting you know, they're not
mm.
getting the full benefits of what they could get from it.
Right.
And so that's where I think having them at the facilities is great. Maybe having two. I think building out a full scale float spa within these facilities is not
That's not their goal anyway.
right.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I think it's a matter. I would agree that having a place to go to and getting a high quality service, yes. Having a place to just try it out for 15, 20 minutes after your practice, it's also great.
But I think people are human athletes. I think we're all human athletes. We may not play basketball, we may not play football, but we got to perform. And I find it interesting that athletes or like movie stars back in the day, this was always like this. They always had access to stuff like we have in Inception. And now I've made it where everyday average people can
Get
have
access.
access to these things. What do you think that is the drawback? Why do people don't really gravitate towards it, even though they see that, all these their favorite people, their stars, their athletes are using them? Why do you think I mean, there should be thousands of these places.
I think because of the bridge. The bridge hasn't been built yet. I think concepts like Inception, brands like Inception, and you look at places like House of Athlete, Brandon Marshall's
Yep.
brand.
Mhm.
He put a float pod in his place there, and it's similar type of setup as these other
Yep, I saw that.
gyms, and it's open. And um, I think that's the bridge, is that introducing them to high quality service, health, alternative health tools like those, like what you have, and the tools that you offer there. So, because I mean, like you're saying, a lot of these athletes are trying to find an edge, but
Mhm.
humans are also, like you said, human athletes. Humans are trying to find an edge first and foremost. Athletes just so happen to find them when they're in these high level facilities.
Right.
So introducing places like Inception, and if we can have one in every corner, I think people would be a lot better off from a mental and physical
Mhm.
standpoint.
How has the industry grown since you've gotten in? Has it grown from the time I met you, or is it kind of stagnated? Because I know I see places open up, I see places close.
I will say I think the industry has grown, knowledge-wise, I think the information's getting out there about floating, and I think it's grown on a large scale to the general masses. But I
Hmm.
think facilities themselves have there's not a lot of float spas, general float spas opening up anymore. There's more of gyms putting these things in, adding
Mm,
floating to their service, whether it's a massage therapist
right.
or it's a chiropractor. They're just adding these things to their services.
Mm,
Um, that's where, I'm not here to praise you the entire time, but that's where you've kind of beat people to that concept because you understand the tool enough because you've used the tool for how long to package this stuff together to say, hey, this is what I'm offering, which hence the whole mental health gym. These other facilities, these chiropractors, these massage therapists, these gyms that are trying to add these things in, they're not knowledgeable about the actual benefits of it and how to couple them together. So I think it's growing on a large scale from general people knowing more about it. I think
mm.
float spas are starting to convert from float spas, just general, to adding different modalities.
I always saw that as I don't know if you remember from when we first met. That was my main message to you. I said, what's gonna happen is people gonna add a lot of different things, and that's what happened. Because I was already again like when Dave Asprey was talking about being a biohacker. Like I was there with Dave Asprey. You know what I'm saying? Like
Hmm.
I had stuff. Like
Hmm.
when you say he had the number one, the first biohacker facility, I'm like, no, you didn't.
Right.
Like
And it's out. I think it's out. Where is? I don't know where it's at. California somewhere.
California. Like I opened mine in 2007. You know, like no, you didn't.
He
Like
opened his in 2017, so
yeah,
10 years
yeah,
after. Yeah.
yeah. He was doing
Biohacking.
biohacking type things, but I had an actual facility. I had a power plate like 2010. The difference was I wasn't the white guy from Silicon Valley. Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not a white guy from Silicon Valley. I was a black guy from Detroit. And, we added these tools and I was playing around with stuff, trying to figure out stuff for myself. But yeah, that's interesting that these float places that you see a lot of them now that's starting to and it's not just float places. I've seen places like mine close. Some places that had like cryotherapy and
But that's also because they didn't take. That could also be. I should say that's not because, but that could also be because they didn't take the time to use these things enough to couple them together to find a way to get an outcome.
yeah.
You've established that. A lot of these other facilities, I don't want to name one's name, but a lot of these other facilities, like you're saying, because I can say that there's been facilities. I think they're throwing too many things at the wall for so long before they have to
Mm,
close and fold.
yeah. Yeah, you can get into what I call the wellness junkyard.
Where you just keep throwing a
you
bunch of.
you just because from a business standpoint, from because you're a B2B, you're a B2B guy. So from a B2B guy, and you're selling me a piece of technology. Yeah, man, they going to once you put one of these here, they gonna be knocking down your door for these. Like, no, they're not.
Right. That is so true.
No, they're not. You seen Nova Thor before? You seen a Nova Thor far infrared laser bed? The laser beds? They cost $150,000, man,
I've
for
never even
these
heard of
laser
that.
beds. Really? So the Nova Thor laser bed, it costs 150,000. I remember they come talking to me years ago. Oh man, yeah, you get one of these, and they give you the breakdown of how much money you're gonna be able to make if you
Generate
see
alcohol.
if you see this many clients. People are not asking for Nova Thor red light therapy beds, man. Like they're not. They're
You're
not.
saying everyday people aren't asking to
No,
use
no.
something like
B2B, you're a good salesman to me,
right, but
but B2C,
doesn't
it's
correlate.
totally different.
But that goes back to what we were talking about earlier though. That's the bridge.
Yeah.
You're introducing the bridge.
And then the problem is that and I've seen it with every company I've used with their technologies. The companies are always great, again, B2B at selling the technology to B2B, but nobody's educating the business to be able to not sell the technology because we're not in the same business. I
Mhm.
don't sell float tanks,
Mhm.
you know. So when you're stuck doing that, yeah, your business is going to close because you got a wrong business model.
And that's something that I can say Flowpod this last year has tried to focus on outside of our user interface with the smart switch. We'll get into but that. But the main thing has been trying to help clients understand the business of floating
Mm,
and trying to set them up for success, getting away from the whole again the customer versus client thing. I want to get away from supplying tanks to customers. I want to supply tanks to clients that actually care about what they're actually offering. I don't want to, if someone wants to put one in their house, it's at their freedom to do whatever they want. But if someone
right.
putting this thing into a business and they're talking about pricing models, doing Groupon, doing that kind of
Mm,
stuff, those are red flags for me that I like to point out to them when I'm doing my training. So when I go out and install these things, I travel around and install them. Um, I look at it as I set it up, I test the units to make sure everything works as it should, and then I train the staff on how to operate them as they
mm,
should. And it's really every business is every business is the same when it comes to the tank, but when it comes to the actual flow of the business, every business is different.
right.
Kind of what you're saying there, and going back to the separating the customer from a client, going to that Novatech thing, we don't want to just sell business to business. We want that business that we're selling it to be able to relay the message as a
Mm,
bridge
mm,
to the end customer.
right.
And I think that's where if we, if with you using the tanks that you're using by Craig Silver Wave float rooms,
Right.
those things are awesome, and I think that's where if you're able to showcase those at your facility, Craig Silver should be sending all of his customers to your facility to float, to
Right.
try your facility out because you have coupled it with other things that
Mm-hmm.
make it an overall comprehensive service. And so that's where we have definitely focused this last year on instead of just selling a float pod to somebody and saying, go do what you can do to make money. We're never going to promise someone that they'll make money, but we definitely want to lay out the groundworks for them to be successful as much as we can.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it's important too that it's across the industry that there's cooperation versus competition within it. Because a lot of times people think, well, you're a float tank is a float tank. You know, they
filter and
they
fiberglass.
they do have different elements to it for sure. I mean, I've seen Crash's float tank is like ridiculous. First of all, you ever floated in one of his tanks before?
I have, and he's in Venice Beach, right?
Yep.
Yep, I have. So his tanks are those things they are what they're worth. I mean,
Yeah.
they're robust.
They're
They're
like what 40 something thousand.
45, I think is what they go for. 52, I think is what the like the elite one or whatever, like
Yeah.
his highest end one. But yeah, 52,000 bucks, I think is the highest end one.
But imagine getting black people to float in those things. Let me tell you, man. Hey,
I still haven't got my dad to float, by the way. I need to get his
let me
dad.
tell you, our float tanks, Craig's tanks, the Wave float room has a glass door on the front. So the glass door creates safety, right?
Mm.
Man, Crash's tanks, them things look like bank vaults. Like we having a hard time floating with the light off, bro. So we have a totally different demographic. Black people, we don't like to be in that, and it's not even. Here's the misnomer. Oh, what if I'm claustrophobic? Like those tanks are big, but
Mhm.
people still look at them. People used to freak out. That's why I moved away from the pod because people were talking about I want to get in one of those.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
and you don't see a lot of black people floating.
You don't. There's not a lot of diversity right now, which is also a
Right.
push we're
So
trying to
I
get down.
so I went and I made something that was more inviting for black people. It was a glass door, you know,
Mhm.
and it's I mean we don't I took the music out. I mean that's just a headache, man.
You don't even offer the music at all? Hmm.
Nope. I stop
Okay.
because people were playing DMX, bro. It's like, I'm like man, like
Hold up. How you about to say now black people are getting in it and they playing DMX?
I kid you not. One time I went in there, somebody's playing DMX, and I was just like, "Listen, back to outcomes, right? What are we trying to accomplish?" And I read the book, I
True.
read the
I didn't read that
manual.
book.
I read the manual, so I want to stick. Again, I understand the whole sense. Some people are hardcore sensory deprivation addicts too.
Mhm.
Like I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to drop of humidity to fall on my. Like,
If they hear any sounds, they want their money back, type
right,
of thing. Yeah.
that's very hard to accomplish.
Mm.
You know, like you're gonna hear some things. You're gonna you know bounce off the walls at times. But the overall outcome is I always ask, well, how do you feel? And I think I learned that from you guys. I believe I did learn that from
When they come out of the float
yeah.
and you ask
Yeah, I
them,
think I learned that from working with you. I think it was from True Rest or whatever. It's like put their attention on how they feel versus asking them like, so what do you think? Never ask what do you think. That's a horrible question
now
to
we're about to go
ask
right down
people.
the rabbit hole.
No. Well, I did well, I itched my back and it was no. It's how do you feel? Oh, I feel great, but and then I always go back, okay, but how do you feel? I feel
Mm.
good. Okay, that's all that matters.
So you
That's
keep driving that outcome.
that's all that matters, man. The
Mm.
only reason people come to Inception because they want to move from pain to pleasure. That's what we're trying to do as human beings. That's what you sell.
Pain to
Moving from
pleasure.
pain to pleasure.
Mm.
Some people, you got to go through the pain though to get to the pleasure, because a lot of us we're stuck. We're stuck in pain, and when you get in the first time, you highly aware of how much pain that you're in when you get into a float tank. That's where when you call it sensory acceleration, that's what I think about because you're what's accelerated is your awareness to your own sensory internal stimulus. You're aware of that now that before you weren't aware of. So your thoughts, when your first time getting in the tank, did your thoughts race? Did you?
My brain was scrambled. Yeah, exactly. I was running all over the place. But I think people, like you said there, when people get in and they have pain in certain areas or aches in certain areas, those things definitely hyper focus on those. But I wanted to ask you real quick, what's your experience when it comes to diversity, getting Black folks into the float tank? Is it something that you hear them say they would never get into a float pod as opposed to an open float room? Do you hear feedback directly like that, or
All the time.
interesting?
I heard it all the time. Um, and of course, a picture online never does a float pod justice. And let me tell people, I liked the float pod personally,
For sure.
you know. So I never personally had an issue with it. That was my first tank.
Mm.
And that was my first that was my third float tank experience. But no, people would see a picture online and they would come in and they'd be like, and we would show it to them. They're like, oh no, we show them. See, when you show them a room, they immediately gonna gravitate towards the room.
'Cause it's open, it's more and it's like you said with the glass door, it's transparent.
Hmm.
Um, but and it's interesting because and the reason why I wanted to ask you that is because when I look at my family members as an example, I've gotten I mean, I've gotten the entire white side of my family to float when I think
Okay,
about it.
yeah, well,
But I haven't
yeah.
gotten one of my black side of my family has not floated. Not one of my members of my black side of my family has floated yet. It's kind of interesting, and they all live in Detroit. So it's like, why have they not been to
we
Inception?
have different. We're dealing with different stimulus and stressors. You know.
It could also be this, how we carry ourselves, how we come across. I may not be getting the message across. I may not be the right bridge in that way. Um,
I think that could be a part of it. And two, we have an aversion to water. Many black people can't swim. You do know that, right?
I did not know that.
Can you swim?
I can swim.
Yeah.
Can you swim?
Yes.
I was like, that's just crazy. But
But many black people do not know how to swim.
is that legit? I hate,
That's
I don't
that's
mean
a
to call. I don't mean to call fat. I'm just
no,
like,
no,
is
that's a
that
legit thing.
wow?
Ask the producer, let him chime in. I'm telling you, many.
It's a stereotype.
It's a stereotype, but it's if you ask probably 10 black people on the street if they know how to swim, I guarantee you, probably less than half of them know how to swim.
That's crazy.
That's just I mean, and this is just a general, as people listen to this, you can put in the comments if you know how to swim or not.
There you go. Well, I mean,
My mom doesn't know how to swim. My sister never learned how to swim. And I tried to teach my mom how to swim. Like, it's just a thing. Like, here's another thing. Here's a big thing. Black women don't want to get their hair wet.
That's what I was also going to ask you because I mean, my auntie's already told me, you know,
There's a big thing right there. So
what is the effect on the hair?
I mean, man, you talking about black women hair. Like black women.
But no, I'm saying, is there actually an effect on their hair, like
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
salt?
but you gotta understand, a lot of it's not their hair. So
Oh, right,
we
no,
we
no,
we
no, no.
we we using different other people's hair products
Hmm.
in our for our hair. So it's not just like it's not like you're just a white woman who can just rinse your hair and go. And a lot of my clients were white women for the longest, right? That's an easy thing. Black woman, like even my own mom, my mom's like, look, I ain't got time to be, it's a whole
It's a
event.
process,
It's a
yeah.
whole process.
Can I ask you this though? What is there a head cap? Is there something that?
We've tried, um, and a couple people I know have created some makeshift hair hair things, that their hair didn't get wet, but it's still not like a cap. It's not just a cap you just put on. They got to tie their hair up and it has to be tied 4 or 5 different ways.
So
And
there has to be an accessory of some sort that we can develop or come up with that can be,
probably,
you know,
probably.
usable to or usable and reusable potentially.
But I will say, even with all that I said, more black people are floating at my facility probably anywhere else in the country. I'm pretty positive about that.
That'd be a interesting statistic though to pull. I mean,
Well, I mean, most of my demographic now have shifted. Now it's probably 98% black people.
see that would be that, especially with it being a mental health gym.
Hmm.
That'd be very powerful, I think, for the community to have that statistic out there that that those numbers have shifted in the way of predominantly black people are using your gym,
But people aren't coming to float.
but they're coming to use your.
People are coming to the mental health gym that just happens to have floating in there. And when people try to opt out of floating, I highly encourage them not to do that. Don't opt out. Do it. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's all right. You know, you may feel uncomfortable. Your mind may race. You damn near may have a panic attack, but you're in a safe place and it's all right. That was my first experience. But
Mm,
the more, and that's what I teaching people, the more you do it, the more you can go towards that darkness, man. And I've had moments in the tank when I went towards that darkness, pitch black, sitting in that tank with my eyes open in the pitch black and like loving it, you know?
mm.
When
Getting
you,
that, getting so deep in there where it's so dark, and I can relate with that.
yeah.
This last week was the first time I ever had. 2 weeks ago now. This last 2 weeks I've had a first time I heard a visual in the float tank.
Oh, really?
I've never had like
Out of 1,500?
I've never had a visual pop up, never had a,
Hmm.
lights, never seen anything like that. And this last time I floated, I usually float 2 to 3 times a week. I haven't floated in a couple weeks though, but the color, the way it was basically turned purple,
Mm.
and then the more I focused on the color, it faded. Anytime
Mm.
I didn't focus on it and kind of let myself, the opposite of how I use the float tank. Usually I try to get in there to filter out all those thoughts to then allow myself to focus when I get in and out of it.
Hmm.
Um, the this time, anytime I tried to focus on the color that I'm seeing in front of me, it would fade. Anytime I just let myself be in the
Mm.
moment, it would come back and it'd be like purple as purple can get. And
Mm.
then I fell asleep, kind of dozed off a little bit, woke back up, and everything was blue.
Yeah.
Um, and it was one of those things that I've heard people, Joe Rogan included, tons of different people say that they have visuals in there. Have you ever had visuals in there? Or no?
My so when I first floated, first of all, Alden works with you, right?
He's still one of our sales guys. Yeah.
Um, he told me, he said, "Man, once you get your tank, float every day. It'll change your life." And I like took that literal. So I floated like every day for like a month.
Wow. Put in that work.
Yeah. And yeah, I remember one time I was in there literally, I mean, it's pitch black and a black hole opens and there's stars within that black hole and it starts to open up.
Mm.
And then I don't know what it is with purple. Purple just always pops up.
So you saw purple as
Yeah.
well. Wow, that's interesting.
I see purple, I've seen orange, and like that, like you said, when you don't attempt to try to do something with it, it'll stay around. The moment you start trying to like, figure stuff out with it, it kind of dissipates.
But isn't that that's one of the benefits I can say about floating is when you're exactly that technique you're trying to practice there. When you get out of the float, I almost feel the benefit of living in the moment
Mm,
as opposed to worrying about what's next or what happened in the past. I'm living in the moment. And it's kind of like when people come out of their float or out of one of your treatment rooms, I'm sure they feel better to want to live in that, not want to rush past that color
hmm
or to want to focus on, or to lose that
Smell
color.
the roses, man.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Hmm.
I mean, I've had people tell me, soon as they leave from Inception at times where one guy, he came from Atlanta, he said he got back home and he was just driving around and he realized how sped up everybody was. He was like, man, these people are crazy.
Mm,
I said, yeah, because until you're out of the madness, you can't see your own madness when you're in it. It's not until you've slowed down and you taken a step back to see, like, man, everybody is internally so sped up. And when you get in a float tank, everything slows down internally,
hmm
right? So you literally, like I've had people, I mean, my second float tank experience, I remember I was at the stoplight and somebody was honking the horn, like, because it turned green. And I'm just like, what's going on? Like, because I wasn't quick to the draw, right?
hmm.
Because you're anxious for it to, oh, I stopped at a red light. I'm anxious. Now I'm just like, it's just a red light, bro.
Relax.
Relax. But that's how internally sped up we are. So I think floating in sensory deprivation or acceleration, whatever you want to call it, I think it's something, man, that the world drastically needs. We just not aware of it yet. But as we start to go into these virtual reality worlds and stimulus becomes, because what we keep trying to do is try to do what? Um, first we got social media, and this is the first generation of this level of social media. Think about Nintendo, think about PlayStation 5,
Hmm.
think about the fifth version of social media and what that's going to look like. We're going to be in a metaverse, and we don't know how our brains are going to be able to interact with that. And what's going to be there to be able to help us do that? It's places like mine,
Inception.
you being able to sell tanks to people. People going to probably want to start putting them in their homes more because you need you need to go into that realm and to just kick all digital detox.
Hmm. And then that's where you're counterbalancing the technology. I don't want to end up like the Matrix, to where we're inside of a sensory deprivation tank, plugged into a technology that's using us as a battery. That's something
Yeah,
I don't want to end up as. So to work with technology and not have machines turn against us,
but we kind of already there.
we are. But I'm not.
We, we kind
The
of
new one's coming
already
out.
there.
The new one's coming out. I
The
don't want to have any
newer
spoilers.
version is in the tank with it plugged into your head, but we already there. This thing right now is a symbiotic thing.
Hmm.
It is a we're basically like, what do they call them? What do they call it? Like a cyborg.
We're we're
We're
we're
like
we are. We
cyborgs.
have we have the Apple Watch. We got you got one of them things on your wrist over there, one of the
Yeah, yeah,
Fitbits.
yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
that's
Biostrap, like we're cyborg.
BioStrap.
Yeah, it sort of measures your heart rate variability, sleep, during for sleep cycles.
Partner of yours?
Yep,
Nice.
yep. So we'll be using these to measure again outcomes for people. And I'm not saying that cyborgs is necessarily bad. It's just that how you gonna use the tools, and that's just what it boils down to with everything we're talking about. Technology is not bad.
Mm,
It just is what it is. How you choose to use it is up to you. It's just gonna be a sect of population who, one, that we teach and educate people how to use tools to better their lives versus be used as a tool, you
mm,
know, being used as the battery, right?
mm.
So leave us, what do you think is the what's the next steps for this industry? Where do
I
we go from here?
Yeah, so I think taking what we already have out in the field, looking at Floatpod um, as a company, our next goal is to take the user interface and make it truly automated to where running a float spa is not going to be, or running a float tank in general won't be something that is um, controlled manually, turning it off and on, controlling the music manually off and on. We want to eventually set it up to where it's automated, to where the
Mm,
user doesn't have any interaction with it as much as little as interaction as they can have is what I'm trying to set up. And then
mm,
FloatPod right now we're having a pretty good sales year. Last year was a setback, of course. Everyone had a setback, and this year, we're turning sales back around, expanding our team, focusing on the technical support end of it. Consult Cawthon is my
mm,
new consulting company that I'm trying to work on, and really helping people get into the business industry and trying to break into other health and wellness sectors is really what I'm trying to work on. Taking floating and using Inception as an example is something that I think is the future of
mm.
technology as well as health and wellness. So combining those two together is our next move.
Great. Well, man, again, I appreciate you helping us on, helping me personally on my journey and helping. At first, it was Neuro Fitness Center. Now we Inception and that growth. And whoever works with you, they're lucky to have you. First of all, to be able to assist them on their journey, whether it be their own personal wellness or their actual business.
Mhm.
So again, well, I appreciate you taking the time to come up, bro.
Yes, sir.
Till next time, guys.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Inner Wealth Podcast on EYL.
Get out the matrix and live.
Theme song produced by Be Ready for West Coast Creations. I am Razcast, reminding you to take action, be proactive, be congruent, get out of the matrix, get your mind right. We've automated mental health at Inception. Join the movement. Inner Wealth Podcast. Inner Wealth Podcast. Inner Wealth Podcast.
Get out the matrix and live.